Okay, so good evening everyone. My name is Kath and this is my friend George, and we're here this evening to talk about this subject of emotional well-being. And I guess you might say I was brought in to come and talk about this based on the work that I do with Samaritans. I've been a Samaritan now for 10 years, working at the local branch here in Yeovil. And during that time, I guess I've had the privilege of being able to support many callers who are experiencing distress and despair. I've also had the opportunity to train new Samaritan listening volunteers, as well as training experienced Samaritans. Now, I should also tell you that in my professional life, I'm also a coach and a therapist. So you might say I kind of eat, live and breathe this particular topic. And so what we're going to do this evening, in a moment, I'm going to hand over to George. And George is going to share with you what he's learned about natural confidence. And then I'm going to build on that subject matter. And then right at the end, we're going to get you to reflect on some questions so that you can discuss that. And then, of course, there'll be an opportunity for Q&A. Okay? Over to you, George.
Thank you very much, Kath. Evening, everyone. My name's George Bannister, and I'm here to talk to you about confidence. So I'm the owner of a property development company called BlackOak. We work mainly with period properties and we specialise in renovations, extensions and everything in between. Earlier this year, we won the Daily Telegraph Best Renovation of the Year award in the UK. Now, that's all very impressive, but you're probably sat there right now thinking, why on earth have they sent a glorified builder to speak to us about confidence? Well, over the next 25 minutes or so, that will become clear. So the first area I want to focus on is natural confidence. Now, when I think of natural confidence, I think of someone like Richard Branson. Would everyone agree that he's a fairly natural confident guy? Yeah, a few vague nods there. Okay, so can you guys name for me a couple of people who you think are naturally confident? So think of high profile celebrities, think of movie stars, think of sports stars. We have two people, come on. Dua Lipa, yeah, anyone else? Usain Bolt, brilliant. Okay, so these people who are naturally confident have got on pretty well, haven't they? Now, they've actually done some scientific research into natural confidence. They have ascertained that less than 0.001% of people are born with natural confidence. That's less than 1 in 1,000 people. Now, I was extremely fortunate in the lottery that is life, and I was born with natural confidence. So the reason I'm here tonight is to share with you guys some of the strategies that I just do automatically and naturally so that you can implement in your lives going forward. So I want to take you back to 2011. My cousin Will and I started a company called Shepherd Huts. Anyone here ever heard of a shepherd hut? No? Got half a nod there. So shepherd hut essentially is a small building, quite often wood, you have in your garden. It's on wheels. They're very popular as home offices, as extra accommodation. Recent years, they've become phenomenally popular as holiday lets. Now, when we entered the market, there was already a lot of very well-established companies out there. These companies have been going for years. They sold hundreds of thousands of pounds worth of product every year. They had big marketing budgets. They had fantastic photography. Whereas Will and I, we were just two builders. We were the people who turn up to your house and create a load of noise and dust and hopefully leave things looking pretty. But we entered and we had the confidence that we could create a better quality product, that we can compete with these bigger companies, even though we only had £2,000 to our name to start with. So fast forward to December 2015, which is when I sold out the company. Less than 5 years later, we were turning over £1 million per year, and we were in zero debt. So hopefully you can see where I'm going with this confidence thing, yeah? So one of my favourite life analogies is surfing. This photo was taken just off the island of Lombok, Indonesia, one of my favourite places in the world. Not a massive day, it's about head high there. When you get a big day, it's kind of halfway up that screen. Nobody wants to be sat on the boat taking photos, so everyone's out in it. Anyone here ever tried surfing before? Yeah? Okay, quite a few of you. Hard than it looks, isn't it? Yeah? To do anything that looks vaguely impressive in surfing is extremely hard work. Because when you're on the wave, you've got to be in exactly the right position. And you've got to be in exactly the right position at the right time. Because if you're not, that wave will pick you up, it will smash you down through the surface of the water, it will bounce you off the reef, it will pick you up, it will let you think you're going to get the oxygen, and then it will smash you down again, and then it will bounce you off, and it will keep doing that. And that's called a washing machine effect. Eventually, hopefully, at some stage, it will spit you out at the other end. And that's a lot like life, really, isn't it? Because has anyone here ever felt that life's kind of chewed them up and spat them out a bit? Anyone ever felt like that? Yeah, a few nods. See, when you get chucked out at the other end, you've got two options. You can either quit and go home, or you can paddle back out. And if you paddle back out, that means you've got to go through that adversity that's just chewed you up. But by doing that, you can get back out into the lineup and you can have another go. Because without doing that, you won't get to get the good bits, which is riding the wave. Exactly the same in life. So I've done a few boxing matches in my time. I use the analogy of boxing, but it translates across any sport really, be it hockey, netball, eventing, whatever it is. In the level of boxing that I was at, you're in the ring for 8 minutes. 3 2-minute rounds, 2 1-minute breaks. That's it, 8 minutes. It's not a vast amount of time, but it's not really the 8 minutes that counts. It's the hours, the days, the weeks, the months preparing. It's turning up for training on time. It's sticking to your routine. It's being disciplined. It's following your diet plans. It's listening to your trainers. Because without all that work beforehand, that 8 minutes is worthless. Okay, so skydiving, also known as jumping out of aeroplanes. Anyone here ever done a skydive? Yeah, we've got one. If you haven't, I'd recommend it. Okay, so if you want to jump out of an aeroplane, you need to go to what's known as a drop zone. Essentially, it's a piddly little airfield somewhere. Now on a drop zone, they organise it by each plane that takes off with people in it will be called a load. So for example, if you're on the 15th plane to take off that day, you'll be on load number 15. What will happen? There'll be a tannoy system there, and you'll hear load 15, 20-minute call. Now what that means is in 20 minutes time, that plane is going to be taking off and you need to be on it. By that time, you probably want to have spoken to all the people you're jumping with, because there's quite a lot of stuff that's got to be decided. You've got to decide who's going inside the door, who's going outside the door, what formation you're doing, what transitions you're doing, what altitude you're braking off at. Quite important stuff. You might also, if you haven't already, want to think about packing your parachute. Next thing you'll hear, load 15, 10-minute call. Yep, you've guessed it, in 10 minutes time, that plane's taken off, you need to be on it. If by that time you have not already taken a nervous wee, because most people need one, it's much better to do it while you're on the ground than while you're in the air. And if you haven't already, you probably want to think about packing your parachute because, let's face it, your life does depend on it a bit. Next thing you'll hear, load 15, 5-minute call. Yep, you know the drill, 5 minutes time, that plane's taking off, you need to be on it. By this stage, you really, really need to have done all the above, spoken to everyone, had a nervous wee if you need one. And if you haven't already, you might want to think about packing your parachute because a parachute is pretty big and it's got to go into a tiny little bag. Now, I've been in that situation before a number of times. I've been there on a 5-minute call with a parachute laid out in front of me. It was my confidence in my ability to pack. It was my confidence in my ability to pack at speed. But most importantly of all, is my confidence to stay calm under pressure that helped see me through. So, I've been told that you lot are quite bright. Would you agree? Come on now, be confident. Yeah, I have one yeah there. I've been told that you lot are very, very good at paying attention. Would you agree? Yes. There you go. See, I told you they're confident, Kev. That's good. Because I've designed a little test for you to see who's been paying attention and who hasn't. I just made one of these things up. Which one was it? Tell you what, I'll make it easy for you. Raise your hand if you think I made the surfing up. 1, 1.5, 2.5, 2.5, I'm not sure. Okay, raise your hand if you think I made the boxing up. I'm getting quite assertive now. That's at least 6, 7, 8. Okay, raise your hand if you think I made the skydiving up. Okay, so that looks like most of you think I made the boxing up. I'm afraid to say you're all wrong. The thing I made up was a natural confidence bit, absolute load of nonsense. You see, confidence is a learned behaviour, and that means that it can be learned by anyone at any time. Do you think the person in that photo looked particularly confident? Because I'll tell you what, they're not. That was me at the age of 22 years old. 14th of January, 2005. I'd just been remanded into Exeter prison for attempted armed robbery on a post office. In the lead up to this photo, there was 2 failed suicide attempts. There was another one that night. Now, the reason I got to that place was because I was a heroin and crack addict. And I was bang at it, probably £200 worth of gear every day. So I can tell you, confidence doesn't lead you to a place like that. What leads you to a place like that is low self-worth, low self-esteem, self-hatred, disconnection from your family, disconnection from your friends, disconnection from your work, disconnection from society, and the worst one of all, disconnection from yourself. So whilst in prison, I discovered that, funnily enough, I had quite a bit of time on my hands. And one day, a guy came up to me and he said, I suggest you read this book. And I wasn't really much of a reader at this time. So I said, yeah, go for it. This book was called The Elephant and the Twig by a guy called Jeff Thompson. Now, the basic concept of this book is if you get a little baby elephant, like cute little baby elephant with little elephant ears and little elephant nose. That was my elephant impression, by the way. So you get this cute little baby elephant and you tie it up to a twig. Now that elephant will try and run away, and it's going to try and run away, and it will keep failing, and it'll keep failing, it'll keep failing, eventually it'll give up. But that elephant gets bigger and it grows up. And when it grows up, it gets to about 2 tons in weight. Now that's a lot of elephant. So what do you think would happen if you got that 2-ton elephant and you tied it to the twig? What's going to happen to the twig? It's going to break, isn't it? That's what you'd think, but that's not what happens. You see, that elephant has experienced what's known as learned helplessness. It's given up. It doesn't bother trying anymore. Now, I see this day in, day out. I see it when people say to me, there's no point leaving my abusive relationship because who else would want me? When people say to me, there's no point me asking for a pay rise because I'm not worth it. When people say to me, there's no point me trying to start my own company because people like me don't run companies. Now, fortunately, there is a counter to this. There is learned optimism. There is learned confidence. And I have been practicing these principles for over 10 years now. So there's another part in this book where Jeff says, start paying attention to how people respond when you ask, how are you today? Because at least 9 out of 10 people will say, not bad. Now, what's happening here is your subconscious mind doesn't understand nots, won'ts, can'ts, don'ts. So all your conscious mind hears is the doing word or the feeling. So when someone says, how are you? And you say, not bad, all your conscious mind registers is bad. So Jeff sets a task in this, and he says, I want you to kind of overdo it a bit and be really positive. So I'll set the scene. I was living at the time in Dartmoor prison, serving a 3.5-year sentence. Now, as prisons go, Dartmoor's pretty rough and it's fairly violent, but I thought I'll give this a go. So someone will say, how are you today? I go, you know what, I'm absolutely amazing and I am loving life. And they give me like a really weird, strange look and they'd be like, what the hell are you on about? I said, well, let's look at this, shall we? I got a roof over my head. I get 3 mediocre meals a day. On Wednesdays, I leave my laundry outside my door. Little man runs along, picks it up, brings it back on a Thursday. I've got access to one of the best gyms in the Southwest. I mean, Nuffield Health has not got anything on that place. And what I found was that actually I became really happy just from the words I was using, just from changing my language. So after I left prison, I decided to put down the hard drugs, stop doing heroin and crack and injecting anything, because that stuff's bad for you, right? Yeah. But I carried on drinking alcohol, taking a bit of ecstasy and doing a bit of cocaine, because in my world, everyone does that, right? Yeah. But what I found 4 years later, by 2010, emotionally, I was in exactly the same place. I was empty inside. You can imagine it's like you've got a donut inside you. And it doesn't matter what you try and put into that hole, whether it be alcohol, drugs, shopping, sex, work, if you've got that empty hole inside you, nothing will fill it. And I decided enough was enough. So I went into rehab. I did a 28-day program. Now, on the last day in rehab, one of the counsellors came up to me and he said, I'd highly recommend you do some CBT, cognitive behavioural therapy. So off I went and signed up for some CBT. Now, the format I did it in was a kind of psychotherapy. Psychotherapy doesn't work brilliantly with me. With some people it works fantastic. But there was one thing that absolutely changed my life. So I'm sat there in front of this woman, and she asked me a question, and I said, well, yeah, but I can't do that because I'm not very confident. And she said, whoa, stop, right there. She said, I want you to change one thing about what you've just said. She said, rather than saying, I am not very confident, I want you to change that to, I used to not be very confident. And I thought, what difference is that going to make, really? I said, you know what? I've got nothing to lose here. It's not going to cost me anything. So I did it. I didn't do it perfectly straight away, but I persisted and I persevered. Now, what happens with this? By me saying, I used to not be very confident, the person I'm talking to assumes that I am now confident. I'm not saying that I'm confident, I just say that I used to not be. Because they assume that I am confident, they start to treat me like I'm confident. And when someone starts to treat you like you're confident, you start to act like you're confident. And once you start to act like you're confident, yes, you've guessed it, you've become confident. To the extent, people now walk up to me and they say, well, yeah, it's right for you because you're really confident. My name's George Bannister. Thank you very much. Over to Kath.
Thanks, George. Okay, so have any of you read The Boy, the Mole, the Fox and the Horse by Charlie Mackesy? Good. I thought we might have some of you who have experienced that. I'm using his slides, his quotes and his drawings because I think this book more than anything demonstrates what emotional well-being is all about. So when it comes to talking about our physical health, is it fair to say that if we've all been trained to brush our teeth twice a day, and if we do so, we'll keep the dentist away? We know that if we get a physical ailment in the body, it's a good idea to consult with the doctor. But when it comes to our emotional and our psychological health, it's an altogether different matter. You see, we appear to value our physical health more than our emotional health. It's also noticeable that the majority of individuals find it much easier to feel compassionate for somebody if they have a physical disability than if maybe they're grappling with crippling anxiety or depression. But here's the thing, the mind affects the body and the body affects the mind, and there's no separation. And yet, here's the thing, we don't listen to our emotions. We've learned not to listen to our emotions until we're crying out for attention, until we've got aches and pains and distress in the body. We're physically exhausted. Or it might be, in George's example, where our coping strategies have gone somewhat haywire and they've become life-threatening. Now, the World Health Organization currently reports that the leading case of disability globally is in fact depression, outstripping cardiovascular disease and cancer. We know, actually through research, that loneliness and social isolation, not only does it distort our thinking, but it also compromises our immune system. And there's also research that suggests prolonged exam stress, and I guess you'll be able to relate to that, can in fact make us more susceptible to viral infection. So if you imagine that somebody's experienced a life where they've had significant traumatic events happening, then not surprisingly, is it understandable to see that they're going to be more subject to physical distress, dis-ease, and heart disease. So what is this subject called emotional health? So emotional health is basically, it's basically what we say to ourselves. It's how we think, it's how we feel. It's how we get emotions. Well, first of all, it's understanding what we're feeling in any given moment and also being able to understand the emotions of others. It's not, by the way, about being happy all of the time. Emotional intelligence is this idea that we can identify emotion, understand where it's coming from, and we can start to get emotions to work for us rather than against us. And if we do that, what we're actually doing is we're building emotional resilience. And that enables us to cope with anything that life is going to throw at us. And I was talking earlier with Ian, and of course we've all been through that more recently, haven't we? Because we've been coping with the uncertainty of the lockdowns, the 3 lockdowns, and obviously what that's done for each and every one of us. We've had to just work it out as we've gone along, really, because none of us imagined we would be in this situation. So none of us are immune to painful emotions. And I want you to imagine that emotional health, well, let's actually start with a social experiment before I go there. Raise your hand if you've ever felt a sense of joy and excitement about something that's coming up. Great. Raise your hand if you've ever felt a sense of fear and trepidation about something that's coming up. Raise your hand if you've ever said or done something that you've later come to regret. Raise your hand if you've ever felt rejection in love. Raise your hand if you've ever felt lonely. Raise your hand if you've ever felt a sense of loss or bereavement. Okay. Does this not demonstrate that these are universal emotions? We're all going to experience a range of emotions throughout our life course. So emotions are not black and white. In fact, they're multifaceted, they're multicolored. And we don't sort of talk about emotional well-being as either good or bad. Of course, I know there is a tendency in the world to label things as negative and positive. And we know that as humans, we're wired, we move towards pleasure, we move away from pain. But it's not black and white. None of us are immune to painful emotions. And as George was saying, life has this way of 1 minute picking us up and the next minute pulling us down. And that is the washing machine analogy. It's also what makes us makes for a more compassionate society, because it makes us more emotionally healthy and resilient. So, the question I've got to ask you is, I'd like you to consider, first and foremost, a time in your life when you feel you could have handled your emotions better. There'll be a situation, it can be anything, but think back to that time. What was going on for you in that moment? What was the situation? And how did those emotions affect you? Now, what I'd like you to do is pair up. So turn to somebody to the left or to the right of you, or behind you or in front of you. And I'd like you to have a conversation with them, a couple of minutes either way. Just share, okay?
Feels quick. It's quick.
From where you're about 5 minutes.
Yeah, the hours. Time 25 every time. Must be speaking quicker. That's the thing. Audience participation. So I can grab it.
Thank you.
So how was that? Would anybody like to share? Don't be shy. Okay.
When I was quite young, my sister in the first lockdown, and it made me feel quite guilty.
Okay, so you felt guilty. All right. And how did it feel to share with somebody else about that situation?
Good. She agreed. Just a brother, so.
Okay. Anybody else? See, sometimes it can feel quite awkward, quite overwhelming to share those emotional burdens. I don't know if any of you went through in your minds this idea of, oh God, you know, what will they think of me? Do I really want to, you know, actually sort of admit to this? And then you might have had that positive uplift when somebody said, yeah, I can relate to that. That happened to me too. Or, well, this is what happened to me. And so actually you feel lighter when you share something, when you share something that's obviously on your mind, yeah, and it's bringing you down. That's at least what our research at Samaritan shows us. Okay, so I want to move on, and I want to spend a little bit of time just talking about various coping strategies that will help you in life, particularly when it comes to this whole subject matter of emotional well-being. Now, George's story showed us a lot, didn't it, around mindset and what was going through his thought processes when things were unraveling for him, and then effectively he was on this road to success, and he changed his life. He changed his life for the better. So if anything, what I want to do is to help you understand and unpack a little bit more about what's the emotional framework that's sitting behind that. So first, I want to start with the first coping strategy is recognize when you've got inner conflict. So what do I mean by that? What I really mean is this. It's when your thoughts say one thing and your feelings say another. There's misalignment. So you might say something, but you don't feel it underneath. You don't feel that at all. So 3 things about inner conflict. The first thing, and George highlighted this to a degree, it's recognizing that your internal world drives all of your actions and behaviors. And that internal world is a world of emotion. So if you believe, for example, that emotions are kind of messy and unpredictable, and they're dangerous and they're unnecessary, not surprisingly, you'll want to amplify only the positive and disregard anything else. But you're going to miss out. You will lose out in life, because here's the second point. We're biologically wired to feel, aren't we? That's why we're called human beings, not human doings. And so if we suppress our emotions, that pain has to come out somewhere eventually. Remember, we talked about the correlation between physical health and mental and emotional and psychological health, yeah? So, what we resist always persists. And it's useful to see emotions like temperature regulators. So they show us actually what we care about the most. So if we go against, let's say, our own expectations and our moral code and what we value, then not surprisingly, It will set up emotional distress patterns in the body. And it could even turn to despair, particularly in George's case. He was sharing that with you, where we've got heavy emotions like shame or guilt, and that's going to weigh heavy in the body. My second coping strategy is learn to get really curious. So rather than, let's say, rather than avoiding the emotion and judging the emotion, that's not something I want to feel, so I'm going to put that away. I'm going to distract myself with something else because it doesn't feel good, is lean into the emotion and learn to get curious. So again, 3 things that I have to offer you. The first thing I want to say is, have you ever noticed how maybe some days you proverbially you kick the cat or the dog, or you get angry with a loved one, but in reality it's not that particular situation that's making you angry or upset. It's actually something to do with an unprocessed emotion that might have happened a day ago, or it might have been a week ago, a month ago, even a year ago. Let's say it might be something related to somebody said something and hurt you, and that's still festering. It might be that you're feeling just really lonely and you're missing your family right now, which is perfectly understandable. It might be that you feel disappointed because you didn't get picked for the school team. It might be all of those things. So I invite you to pay attention to your emotions and start to check in with yourself twice a day. I always say this is a good thing to do first thing in the morning when you wake up, and then sometime after dinner when you're noticing, and you just check in with your body. What are you feeling? How are you feeling? And what's impacting that? And the more you start to get conscious with this practice, the better you become at understanding where those emotions actually come from. And they're not actually there to harm you, they're actually there to serve you. Once you start to understand them more, you start to understand yourself more. It's important to understand that emotions don't own you. They really don't. They are, your behavior and your identity are separate. So when we can start to have an observation practice and we can remain curious, what we can notice is that we might be feeling sad today as opposed to we're a sad person. And there's a big difference. Now, if somebody's had repeated trauma, as I say, significant challenge and disappointment in life, is it little wonder that they start to identify with their emotion? If they've repeatedly lost out in life, they believe that they're a failure, and they start to tell themselves that they're not worthy or they don't deserve. And of course, this happens a lot with our callers at Samaritans, where we're helping people to help themselves and to start to understand this range of emotions and what's going on for them. But it's really important to separate your behavior from your identity. And then being honest about how you feel, it doesn't make you weak. In fact, it makes you a healthy human being. And of course, it's understandable that each and every one of us, we want to avoid the difficult, intense emotional state that we're going to experience. And why is that? Well, here's the thing. So here's what's going on in the body. There's a chemical reaction that gets activated in the body, and it's a sensation that feels something like this. So we have tightened muscles, we have a shortness of breath, we have a rapid pulsating heart, we've got dry mouth, we can't get our words out, and clammy hands, sweaty brow, and then this intense heat that comes up through the body like a wave. It's a wave. Sometimes we get discoloration of the skin when that heat is going through the body. And what do we want to do in those situations? Because it's embarrassing. What we want to do is we want to dig a hole and we want to disappear pretty damn quickly. So we do anything to avoid feeling that. But if we can feel that, the emotion no longer has any power over us. It's actually come through us and out. And that's what we need to process when we have those intense emotions. You know, George was talking about cognitive behavioral therapy and how it's really useful to change one's thinking patterns. And that is absolutely true, of course, and that has a part to play in therapy. But if somebody has got significant intense emotion, no amount of thinking is going to change, because actually they're flooded with negative thoughts. And I like to use the analogy of the ant, which is short code for another negative thought. Before you know it, you've got an army of ants in your mind, basically taking over. And you tell yourself rational lies. You rationalize everything, but you're not feeling it. So in that particular situation, with trauma and everything else, we have to feel the emotion. We have to allow the emotion to flow through us and out. Before I come on to this next coping strategy, I want to talk about the emotional scale. If you imagine that you've got an emotional health scale, and at one end of the spectrum, you are coping with life. You've got a sense of security and stability, and you've got this resilience, and life's good, you're functioning, all's going well. And I want you to imagine this other end of the spectrum where you've got the despair, and you're flooded with emotion, and things aren't going well, and you've got negative thinking, and you can't cope. The learned helplessness, as George was alluding to. Well, and we've got this distress going on in between, and that will be different for each and every one of us. So, essentially, there are factors that push us from the functioning end to the despair end, and we call those risk factors. Can you imagine what those risk factors might be? Can anybody give me any idea what those risk factors could be? So if you're feeling... Friends. So yes, so if you've got lots of friends, that might be a rather positive thing. If you've got no friends and you're feeling very lonely and all on your own, that can be a distress, absolutely. There's a whole host of things: loss of job, no family connection. You know, if somebody basically has lost all of their family, bereavement, all sorts of things are going to push us over. And so these there are, at this end of the spectrum, we can move ourselves back, we can resist that downward pressure with protective factors. Anybody give me an idea of a protective factor? So for me, if I'm feeling overwhelmed with life, or I'm feeling my emotions, the best thing I can do is get myself out in nature. All of a sudden I can breathe again, life feels okay, and I can relax. That's just one small measure. Meditation is another practice that can help. So let's go back to the physical health analogy. So let's imagine that you have regularly, you have a balanced diet, you get lots of sleep, you exercise, and you drink plenty of water. Which end of the spectrum are you going to be functioning at, do you think? You're going to be coping well. You're going to be in the emotionally resilient space. Okay. So we're going to drop back when we get flu. Oh, this is exciting.
See you maybe.
And then we're going to move back to our start position. So if you imagine with regard to emotional well-being, you don't wait. You don't wait until you've experienced loss or bereavement to start talking about your feelings. Because often when we need our coping strategies the most is when we've had the most difficulty in acquiring them. So this coping strategy, practice self-compassion. This is about really treating yourself with great care and loving kindness. And this is easier said than done if you've never been shown loving kindness. So there's some things that I would like to offer with regard to that. Just start to notice if you're somebody who chases the accolades. You know, you like to win, you like to achieve, you want to be up there and out there, and it feels great, right? It feels great when you're winning. Maybe you like all the social media likes, you know, when you're posting and getting that acknowledgement. We all love a bit of that, don't we? But I want you to think about, how do you treat yourself when you mess up? What do you say to yourself when you mess up? Because that's really important. It's important to treat yourself with compassion. Now, this idea that we're human beings that are not flawed is in itself flawed. We are all going to make mistakes in life. That's how, as I say, we learn to be emotionally functioning, healthy human beings. It's also what makes for a more loving and compassionate society. So you're not going to avoid making mistakes. We're all perfectly imperfect. And if you direct or dissect even the word compassion, then what you get is compass. And there's a hint there that it's pointing a way back to yourself. And so that then leads me essentially to this idea of connection. Do you remember George was talking about how he felt disconnected from his family and his friends, from his work, from society, but most importantly from himself. So when we practice compassion, we've reconnected with those parts of ourselves that we've lost or denied. Then we're, not surprisingly, we're better able to make connection with others. And why can we do that? Well, because we can spot dissonance in others. And what I mean by that is, they might say one thing, but we sense that they're feeling something entirely different. Because we have learned to be more compassionate with ourselves, we start to show up in a more empathetic way. We start to listen more actively. We don't judge other people. And we start to give people space and time. And in that way, we're allowing people to feel seen and heard and understood. And so, if we're going to summarize, again, back to what Charlie's saying, you know, in his school of unlearning, as he talks about, here's some quotes. One of our greatest freedoms is how we react to things. Life sometimes is going to deal lemons, and there's nothing we can do about it, but we always have free choice of how we want to respond to life circumstances. Our tears fall for a reason, and they are our strength, not our weakness. This is all about vulnerability, really, and vulnerability is the most accurate measure of courage. And if you take the original definition of the word courage, it's the Latin word, it means cur. And cur means heart, and it's about telling your story with your whole heart. Asking asking for help, it's not giving up. It's just refusing to give up. And isn't that the truth of it? And isn't this the truth of it? Love doesn't need you to be extraordinary. And success. What is success really? Success is wanting what you have. And that means we've got to get our head and our heart in the game, because we're human beings and we feel. And that's what makes life worthwhile. Okay. So at this part of proceedings, what I would like to do is I'm going to give you 5 minutes. And what I'd like to do is I'd sort of like to split the hall into 3 groups, if you like. So if I imagine over here, and I'm going to go to the girl with the green dress on and straight up. So that's, yes, you there. And I'm looking at you there. So up here, what I want you to do is I want you to address in your rows the first question. Have a think about and have a discussion about what are some of the risk factors that are going to put people over the edge, put them in emotional distress and despair. And sort of in this middle territory, what I'd like you to do in your rows is have a discussion in your groups at what do you think are some of the protective factors that help people stay emotionally and psychologically resilient. And over here, what I'd like you girls to discuss, please, is well, what do you think makes for a healthy school in terms of support for emotional health, both for students and for staff? What would be the behaviours or the values that you'd be seeing? And we've been talking about this, so it's an opportunity to reflect. So I'm going to give you 5 minutes and then I'm going to ask for some feedback, okay? Over to you.
The Wi-Fi went down. We lost it for about 30 seconds, but we are back on now.
You did well there.
They're used to me appearing at random points. Yeah, sorry about that.
It's all right, don't worry, it's fine. Yeah, I found
I didn't know something. I did it online. So when I did the prison bit,
I find it hard when I'm up and down like that.
I went on to the book. I was talking about the book. I've forgotten about it. I thought, I can't, just keep going. And then as I went on, I was like, oh no, that quiz comes to the next hour and day. Your head just starts churning around.
Yeah, because when I was doing about the risk factor, oh shit, did I do
Yeah. Oh. No. Yeah. Yeah, you did the scale of how you feel between drink lots, exercise.
Absolutely.
That's pleasure.
It's a real story.
Is the skydiving and boxing in the second intro as well?
It's better when you've got a bigger room.
Yeah.
If you've got a really big crowd, you get a lot more feedback. They're good actually. I did one before, how much interaction you get.
You get one of the big differences I find with dealing with the majority of female audience, the girls.
They hold back.
Pardon?
They hold back.
They do. You get more eye contact. And they've got different screens in their face. Whereas with boys, you tend to find that body language is more telling.
Yeah.
and you can tell if you're making them feel better. You might want to do that.
Yeah.
And so those girls, they give less away. So yeah, sometimes you think they're having less of an impact.
Yeah.
No, they don't do because of the reflection.
When we bring in the frogs go, does the I used to do it for the upper six, and they come in I'm really busy actually, and they sit there and who are you? And then after a while, you can see their age level just drop.
Yeah.
All 8-year-olds like, oh my god, it's fantastic. You know. Yeah. And also, I think it's really cool because we spend a lot of time.
Okay, so somebody over here, give me some risk factors. Shout them out. Bit louder. Putting stress on yourself. Good one. Family. What else? Arguments. Give me another one. Fabulous. Comparison to others. Social media. Absolutely. What else? School. School pressure. Anything else? The pressure to perform. The A-grade student, yeah? Okay, fantastic. Thank you very much. Let's see if you can do any better. Protective factors, middle group. What have we got? Come on, you must like to do things that keep you feeling emotionally healthy. Go on, don't be shy. You can do this.
Being around fun, loving people.
Being around fun, loving people. Absolutely, that's so important. People that lift us up rather than drain us. Yes. What else? You like exams? No exams. Yeah, no exams, great. Lots of holiday time. How about holidays? They're always good. How about Netflix? That's always good. All right, so finally, let's come to values. What are the values and the behaviours that we want to see at school?
We said not feeling judged in ignorant and being okay.
Yeah, good one.
Teachers regularly checking up on things to make sure you're okay.
Okay. Having people around you can trust, yes, that's really important. Anything else? Positive. Yeah. How about treating people as you like to be treated yourself? Yeah. How about just paying attention and noticing if somebody's being left out and including them? Yeah. Anything else from anyone else? Okay, well done. Thank you. That's it. Thank you. This is the moment, I guess, if you want to ask any questions. Okay, we've got a question over here.
What's the best way to support someone who's like feeling upset, like in around us?
Okay, so the question is, what's the best way to support somebody who's feeling upset? Someone you're noticing around you that's feeling upset. Okay, here's where I use the word shush, which is absolutely the first thing we do sometimes, is when we're quiet and we're silent, we notice these things. We're giving people space to perhaps want to open up to us and share with us what's really going on. So we can show that we care. So we might do that in different ways. So of course, making eye contact, putting away our phones, looking like we're paying attention to them actually helps as a starter for 10. And then of course it's about having patience, because do you know that, you know, somebody who's experienced some significant emotional distress, it might take them a year before they actually dare to open up and share that with somebody else, believe it or not. So don't be offended if they might, you know, start to open up and then close down again. It may take several attempts. Using open questions is a really good way of getting people to share and open up about themselves. So rather than a closed question, an open question might be, can you tell me more about how you're feeling? Can you tell me more about that? And then you just shut up and let them talk. And I would just encourage you to have courage and to ask if they're okay or that they want to talk. And if they close down, don't be put off by that, because as I say, it may take a bit of time. And of course, sometimes we can feel awkward, so we want to fill that awkwardness with silence. But silence is very powerful. It sort of shows people that you're there and you're listening and you're employing active listening skills, and it's showing non-judgment. And so they're more likely to open up in those situations. Thanks. Anything else that anybody would like to ask?
We have a question from the remote audience. Someone's asked the question, how could you best support someone who's struggling with a mental illness or a mental health problem like an eating disorder or depression?
Okay, so am I repeating the question? Not in this case, thank you. Okay, it really is no different to how I have just really explained. You know, it doesn't matter what somebody is dealing with. You are not needing to be an expert with regard to depression or an expert with regard to an eating disorder. What you need to be in that moment is an active listener, a good friend, somebody who's not going to judge, somebody who is showing genuine interest, that you care about them and their needs. So it's really just employing all of the same techniques. And actually, the less you know theoretically about something, sometimes the better, because you're helping them emotionally.
We've got another question from the remote audience. If someone is dealing with loneliness or homesickness, are there any other practical things that you can do to support and help as a friend? Absolutely. I think someone who's dealing with loneliness, if there's an awareness of that, then regular check-ins, opportunities to include them, inviting them where possible. And of course, I know that there are more problems relating to social distance and such like at this moment in time. But, you know, we have found at Samaritans, of course, that the call volumes have gone up during these periods of lockdown as people have felt isolated and disconnected. And so actually, you know, it really is good to talk. So actually having regular opportunities to chat with them, be it a video call or just on your phone, is actually going to make the world of difference. Do you have any more questions from the group?
answered all the questions remotely, so it just remains for me to thank Kath. One more. Please can you ask Kath and George what motivates them to do what they do? Why do they feel so passionate about delivering these talks?
Oh, that's a great question. And where do I start with that? What motivates me to do the work I do was because I lost my brother, my baby brother, when I was 21 years of age, and he took his own life. So being a Samaritan to me cuts quite deep, if you like, because I know the impact that suicide has on families. And so I wanted to give my time and to make a difference, because I want to live in a world that actually demonstrates care for one another and does that in a very visible way, in a very demonstrative way, by giving my time and my energy and my commitment. And of course, in my therapy practice and in my professional life, you know, when you see the lights go on for somebody, when you see someone turn their story around, a story of shame, a story of guilt, a story of low self-worth, and then they start to see themselves differently, and they start to become all of their potential, there is nothing better, frankly, and it's very, very rewarding. So that's why I do what I do, and I'll let George answer why he does what he does.
Thank you, Kath. So, for me, as a child, I was incredibly shy, and growing up, I lacked confidence so much. Even though I was always reasonably popular, I had a good family life, there was no reason that you could put it down to. Yet, I lacked a feeling of connection and confidence. So it was very easy for me to follow the route into drugs and addiction, because automatically you get that connection, or you get a false connection with people. And the work I've done over the past 10 years, as I said in my talk, people come up to me all the time, they say, oh yeah, it's all right for you though, because you're really confident, aren't you? And I always kind of smirk and kind of laugh to myself, because deep down, under facade, I'm still that scared little boy. So if by doing a talk every now and then, even if I can help one person, just to make one slight little change, that to me means it's worthwhile.
And another question, would George say that growing in confidence was the primary factor in turning his life around? Was that?
I think growing in confidence was a byproduct. So I had to make the decision. The hardest thing about what I did was, I think alcohol was probably one of the hardest ones for me to give up, because it's socially acceptable. When you're a heroin addict, it's quite easy to imagine a life without heroin because it's so traumatic and destructive. But when you're going out on a Friday night and having a few beers, that's socially acceptable. So I think I needed to make that decision first, and it was a very hard decision to make. But once I'd made that decision and started taking action, and then over time with perseverance, the confidence started to build almost as a byproduct. And it's kind of like a snowball effect. It starts very slowly and it doesn't gain much momentum, but you keep practicing, and over time it starts to get bigger, and eventually it gets quite big and you're able to stand up in front of an audience and talk.
And a question for Kath. Some people say that everyone would benefit from therapy. Would you agree?
I actually would. I'm somebody who, as I say, covers the full range of, you know, what is the coach and what is the therapist, and I don't put people in boxes, because I think that actually, you know, we are all things, and essentially the more we can see that range in other people, then the more we will realise our fullest potential. I hope that answers the question.
Thank you very much, Kath. Thank you very much, George. It's my very great pleasure to thank you on behalf of everyone at SG for what you have said to us this evening. It's given us lots to think about. I'm sure it'll give us lots to talk about afterwards. A number of you are going to join us in the upper foyer for an opportunity to talk to Kath and George after the talk and to have a little bite to eat. Please make your way up to the upper foyer if you're involved in that group. The rest of you, I hope you have a lovely evening and a great weekend. Many thanks.